Left behind. The airport had always felt like a place of magic to Sam. A place where dreams took flight, quite literally. The enormous windows let in streams of morning sunlight, illuminating polished floors where hurried footsteps echoed. The scent of brewed coffee mixed with the faint, lingering aroma of airplane fuel. Travelers rushed past in a blur of voices, suitcases rolling behind them, their chatter filled with anticipation for distant destinations. Sam held tightly onto his father's hand as they weaved through the crowd, his small fingers wrapped around the familiar fabric of his father's worn-out brown jacket. A loose thread near the sleeve caught his attention, and he toyed with it absent-mindedly, his mind half distracted by the flashing departure screens above. "Keep up, buddy," his father muttered, his tone edged with something unusual, something Sam didn't quite understand. They reached a row of hard plastic chairs near Gate 14, positioned beneath a large digital clock that blinked 9:47 a.m. in bright red numbers. Sam, still buzzing with excitement at being in an airport, swung his legs beneath the chair, his sneakers just barely skimming the floor. His father knelt before him, hands firm on his shoulders. "Listen, Sam. I need you to be a big boy for me, okay?" Sam tilted his head. "Why?" His father sighed, his jaw tightening for a fraction of a second before his face softened. "I just need to take care of something. It won't take long." Sam frowned. "Where are we going?" His father hesitated. He reached into his back pocket, pulling out his wallet, flipping it open, staring at its contents as if willing it to change. His fingers ran over the worn leather before snapping it shut. "Just wait here." His voice was quieter now, strained. A flicker of uncertainty passed through Sam. His father had never left him alone in a place like this before. But his dad always kept his promises. Sam straightened his shoulders. "Okay." His father managed a small, weary smile. "That's my boy." He ruffled Sam's hair and stood up, glancing around once more before slipping into the river of people flowing through the terminal. Sam watched as his father walked away, his figure blending into the crowd until he was gone. The first hour. At first, waiting wasn't hard. Airports were filled with things to watch, people hugging their loved ones at arrival gates, children dragging teddy bears while their parents fumbled with passports, business travelers speaking into phones, pacing back and forth. Sam reached into his Spider-Man backpack and pulled out his favorite comic book. He flipped through the pages, but his mind wandered. He pulled out his Hot Wheels car instead, running it across the armrest of the chair, making quiet engine noises under his breath. He glanced at the clock. 10:30 a.m. He reached for the last of his cookies and munched on them, swinging his legs to pass the time. His stomach grumbled. He had only eaten a quick bowl of cereal that morning. His father wouldn't be long, though. Maybe they'd grab lunch together when he got back. The second hour. By 11:47 a.m., Sam's fingers tapped anxiously against his knee. His father had been gone for 2 hours now. That was longer than not long, wasn't it? He shifted in his seat, hugging his backpack closer. People around him kept moving, always going somewhere, always with a destination. But Sam stayed still. The crowd ebbed and flowed, but no familiar face returned for him. He turned toward the direction his father had walked. The corridor stretched endlessly, people moving in both directions, but none of them were his dad. Maybe he got lost. Maybe he was waiting somewhere else. Sam slipped off his seat and wandered a few steps forward, scanning the faces of passing travelers. But the moment he stepped too far, a cold realization struck him. What if Dad came back and I wasn't there? He hurried back to his seat, gripping the straps of his backpack. His father wouldn't just leave him. Would he? The fourth hour. By 1:30 p.m., worry turned to discomfort. His stomach ached from hunger, and his throat was dry. The hum of the airport, once exciting, now felt overwhelming. People kept walking past, so many people. But none of them saw him. Nobody noticed the small boy sitting alone at gate 14, waiting. A lady with a stroller sat nearby, feeding her baby a mashed banana from a small container. The sight of food made Sam's hunger worse. He swallowed hard and looked away. The 6th hour. By 3 p.m., panic settled in. He stood up this time. Maybe something happened. Maybe his dad was in trouble. Maybe he should look for him. But where? Sam didn't even know which way to go. He only knew that he had to stay put. Because if he moved and his father came back, then he would have broken the promise. And Thompson men kept their promises. He sat back down, curling into himself, pressing his hands against his empty stomach. His father was coming back. He had to. The 9th hour. By 6:30 p.m., the shadows in the airport had shifted. The sun outside had dipped lower, casting long beams of golden light through the massive windows. Travelers had changed, too. The morning crowd was long gone. A new wave of people had taken their place, families hurrying home, night flights preparing to board. The seats around Sam had emptied and refilled over and over. People came, waited, and left. He stayed. A janitor passed by, pushing a cleaning cart. He paused when he saw Sam, frowning. "You lost, kid?" Sam shook his head. "No. I'm waiting for my dad." The janitor hesitated. Then, with a nod, he pushed his cart away. Sam clenched his fists. His dad would be back soon. The 12th hour. By 9:30 p.m., the airport lights had dimmed. Sam was exhausted. His eyes burned, his stomach twisted in hunger, and his head felt heavy. But he didn't cry. He refused to. He stayed awake as long as he could, watching the corridor where his father had disappeared. Any second now, he'd see him walking back. But seconds turned into minutes. Minutes turned into hours. And eventually, Sam's head drooped against his backpack. Sleep claimed him. And when he woke up the next morning, his father was still gone. And he would never come back. The boy who waited. When Sam woke up, the airport was already buzzing with new travelers. The bright overhead lights made his eyes sting as he blinked away sleep. For a brief moment, he forgot where he was, then it all came rushing back. His father. The airport. The promise. Sam sat up quickly, his heart pounding. His neck ached from sleeping in the chair, and his fingers were stiff from gripping his backpack all night. He scrambled to his feet, scanning the crowd, hoping, praying, that his dad would be walking toward him. But the sea of unfamiliar faces moved past him, oblivious to the small boy standing alone. A lump formed in his throat. He pulled out his lucky Hot Wheels car from his backpack, rolling it between his fingers. His dad had to come back. Maybe something had happened. Maybe he got lost or delayed somehow. Maybe Sam just needed to wait a little longer. He sat back down and focused on the big digital clock above the departures board. 7:42 a.m. He would give it one more hour. Then his dad would be back. The first day alone. The hour passed. Then another. And another. Sam's stomach gnawed with hunger, but he ignored it. His throat was dry, and his hands felt cold even though the airport was warm. By midday, he started watching people closely. A man in a suit drinking coffee. A mother adjusting her toddler's jacket. A teenage girl laughing into her phone. They all had somewhere to go. They all had someone waiting for them. But nobody was waiting for Sam. He clenched his fists. No. That's not true. Dad is coming back. He just had to wait longer. By 2 p.m., hunger became unbearable. His last meal had been yesterday morning, a small bowl of cereal. His stomach cramped painfully, and he felt weak. A few feet away, a woman was eating a sandwich, and Sam's mouth watered at the sight. He glanced at the trash cans near the seating area, his face flushing with shame at the thought. Would there be leftover food in there? Before he could decide, an airport worker pushing a cart of snacks and drinks walked by. Sam's heart leaped. If his dad were here, he would buy something. But his dad wasn't here. Sam slowly got up and followed the cart. He waited until the worker was distracted, speaking to a customer. Then, with a pounding heart, he reached out and grabbed the first thing he saw, a half-eaten croissant someone had left behind on the tray. He darted away before anyone could notice, heart hammering in his chest. When he sat back down, he shoved the stale croissant into his mouth, barely chewing. His face burned with embarrassment. He had never stolen anything before. But he had also never been this hungry before. The second night. That night, Sam stayed curled up in his chair, hugging his backpack like a pillow. He was too hungry to sleep. People walked by without noticing him. Nobody asked why a small boy was alone in the middle of an airport. Maybe they thought he was traveling with someone. Maybe they just didn't care. The janitor from yesterday walked past again, pushing his cleaning cart. He slowed down when he saw Sam. "You're still here?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Sam swallowed hard. "Yeah." The janitor's frown deepened. He looked around as if searching for someone. "Where are your parents?" Sam hesitated. "My dad said he'd be right back." The janitor sighed. "Kid, you said that yesterday." Sam's stomach twisted. He knew. He knew how long it had been. But saying it out loud made it feel real, and he didn't want it to be real. The janitor muttered something under his breath and walked away. Sam buried his face in his backpack. Just one more day. He had to wait one more day. The first week. Days blurred together. Sam learned how to blend in. He stayed in crowded areas so nobody would notice he was alone. He sat near families, hoping it would look like he was with them. He survived on scraps. People left half-eaten food on trays in the food court, and Sam learned to wait until nobody was looking before grabbing something. Sometimes, he got lucky. A woman once handed him an extra sandwich, mistaking him for a lost child. Another time, a businessman gave him a banana without asking questions. Sam learned the airport schedule. He knew when the janitors cleaned, when the food court got busy, and which bathrooms were the warmest at night. He memorized faces. The old man who always read newspapers near gate 22. The couple who argued every morning at the coffee shop. The flight attendant who sometimes gave out free cookies. But no matter how much time passed, Sam kept his eyes on the entrance. Because his father was coming back. He had to. The first month. Sam stopped counting the days. The airport had become his world. He had nothing but the clothes on his back, his backpack, and his lucky Hot Wheels car. At night, he slept in hidden corners, away from security guards who might ask questions. During the day, he wandered through terminals, watching people come and go. He had stopped feeling embarrassed about taking food from the trash. Survival didn't allow for shame. One afternoon, while sitting near a window watching planes take off, a security guard walked up to him. "Hey, kid." Sam's heart froze. He forced himself to look up. "Yeah?" The guard studied him. "I've seen you around a lot." Sam's pulse pounded in his ears. "I'm waiting for my dad," he said quickly. The guard's face softened a little. "How long have you been waiting?" Sam hesitated. The truth was, he wasn't sure anymore. The security guard sighed. "Come with me, okay? Let's see if we can find your parents." Panic shot through Sam's chest. No. No, no, no. If he left, what if his dad came back and couldn't find him? What if this was the moment he returned? Sam shook his head. I can't. I have to wait here. The guard's expression changed. Suspicion. Concern. Kid, you can't just stay here forever. But he could. Because his father had promised. Sam ran before the guard could stop him. He ducked between groups of people, weaving through crowds until he was sure the guard wasn't following him. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, his hands shaking. He hid in a restroom stall for almost an hour, his heart beat loud in his ears. When he finally crept out, he kept his head down and stayed away from the main areas. The realization settled in his chest like a stone. He was completely alone. His father wasn't coming back. And yet, he still couldn't leave. Because leaving meant accepting the truth. And Sam wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The airport becomes home. Sam wasn't sure exactly when the airport stopped being a place of waiting and became his home. Maybe it was the second month, when he stopped looking at the main entrance every 5 minutes. Maybe it was the third month, when he realized he knew every food court worker's schedule better than they did. All he knew was that he belonged here, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. Learning to survive. The first real lesson Sam learned was how to move without being noticed. For the first few weeks, he had spent his days near the same terminal, waiting. But that had made him too visible. Security guards started looking at him suspiciously. A few even asked questions. So, he learned how to blend in. He never sat in one place for too long. He moved between terminals, always keeping his backpack with him. If someone stared at him for too long, he walked toward a random gate, pretending he was traveling with someone. At night, when most travelers disappeared, the airport changed. The food court closed, the floors were mopped, and the announcements became fewer. This was the time when security paid attention to anyone lingering too long. Sam adapted. He found an unused utility closet near an abandoned gate. It was dark and smelled like cleaning supplies, but it was warm. He kept his shoes on when he slept, in case he needed to run. Stealing without stealing. Sam had never stolen anything before the airport. But hunger had a way of making people forget their morals. By the second month, he had mastered what he called stealing without stealing. He never took from people's bags. That was real stealing. He convinced himself he was only taking what others had thrown away. At the food court, people often left half-eaten sandwiches or untouched fries on trays before they left. Sam waited until they walked away, then swooped in, grabbing whatever looked edible before the cleaning crew cleared it. Once, he got lucky. A businessman tossed a whole boxed meal into the trash, barely touched. Sam fished it out, ignoring the disgusted looks from passers-by. Hunger was stronger than embarrassment. He learned other tricks, too. At night, some food vendors threw out entire loaves of bread or bags of fruit that were slightly bruised. If he timed it right, he could grab them before they hit the dumpster. Some employees noticed him. A kind old woman who worked at a coffee shop started forgetting to throw away muffins, leaving them near the trash for him to take. A janitor once muttered, "Hey, kid," and tossed him an unopened bottle of water. Sam never asked for anything. He never spoke unless someone spoke to him first. But he was grateful. The people of the airport. After 3 months, Sam knew more about the airport than most workers. He knew that the woman at gate 14 cried into her coffee every morning before boarding her flight. He knew that the man at the newspaper stand always read the front page out loud under his breath. He knew that the old couple who flew to Florida every Monday held hands the entire time they waited for their flight. Most of them never noticed him. But some did. A teenage girl with purple hair once sat next to him and offered half her sandwich. She didn't ask questions. Just handed it over, then left. A pilot once gave him a candy bar, ruffling his hair without a word. A security guard, not the one who had chased him before, but a different one, sometimes glanced at him, his expression unreadable. Sam didn't know if these people suspected the truth. But as long as they didn't ask questions, he was safe. The day the reporter came. It was raining the night Sam's world almost changed. He was sitting near the window, watching planes disappear into the stormy sky, when a woman sat beside him. She wasn't a traveler. She was a reporter. Sam knew this instantly. She had a notebook, a recorder, and sharp, observant eyes. "Hey, kid," she said. "You're here a lot." Sam stiffened. She wasn't just making small talk. She had noticed him. He forced himself to shrug. "Just waiting for my dad." The lie tasted like ash on his tongue, but he said it automatically. She tilted her head. "How long have you been waiting?" Sam hesitated. He wasn't sure anymore. "Months? A year?" The reporter tapped her pen against her notebook. "Some workers mentioned you. Said you've been here a while." Sam's stomach turned. This was bad. Very bad. He grabbed his backpack and stood up. "I have to go." But before he could run, she said something that froze him in place. "What's your dad's name?" The words punched the air from his lungs. Because the truth was, he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember his own father's name. Sam swallowed hard. His mind raced, but it was blank. He knew his father's face, his voice, the way he smelled like coffee and aftershave. But his name? His hands clenched around the straps of his backpack. He couldn't stay here. Without another word, he bolted. He ran through the terminal, weaving between travelers, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He didn't stop until he reached the old utility closet, shoving himself inside, pressing his back against the wall. His chest ached. His hands trembled. He couldn't remember. Had it been too long? Had he forgotten his own father? Hot tears burned his eyes, but he wiped them away quickly. He had cried too much in the beginning. He had learned not to cry. Crying didn't change anything. The next day, the reporter was gone. But Sam felt uneasy. People were noticing him. And that meant he wasn't safe anymore. The plan. Sam knew he couldn't stay forever. The airport had been home for nearly a year. He had learned its secrets. He had found a way to survive. But sooner or later, someone would force him to leave. And he had nowhere to go. One night, as he sat watching the departure board flicker with flights to places he could only dream of, he made a decision. He couldn't keep waiting for his father. Because deep down, he knew the truth. His father wasn't coming back. And if Sam wanted a future, he had to stop waiting. He had to leave. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed help. And there was only one person in the airport he thought he might be able to trust. The security guard. The one who had noticed him. The one who hadn't turned him in. Sam took a deep breath and stood up. For the first time in a year, he wasn't going to run. He was going to ask for help. A chance at escape. For nearly a year, the airport had been Sam's entire world. He had memorized every gate, every food stall, every quiet corner where he could sleep unnoticed. But now, standing near the edge of the bustling security checkpoint, his heart pounded like never before. Because for the first time, he wasn't hiding. For the first time, he was stepping forward, asking for help. The security guard who knew too much. The security guard stood near gate 17, arms crossed, watching the travelers shuffle past. He was a tall man in his late 40s, with dark brown skin, a graying beard, and eyes that seemed to see everything. Sam had noticed him months ago. Unlike the other guards, who only cared about enforcing rules, this one noticed people. And, more importantly, he had noticed Sam. The first time their eyes had met, Sam had been terrified. He thought for sure the man would call the police, drag him away to some orphanage or worse. But he never did. Instead, he just watched. Sometimes, he even looked concerned. That was why Sam had chosen him. Taking a shaky breath, he walked forward. This was it. The guard looked down at him. "You again," he muttered, his voice deep and calm. "You always hanging around here, kid?" Sam swallowed. His throat was dry. His hands were sweaty. "Don't run. Don't lie. Just say it. I need help." The words felt foreign in his mouth. The guard's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Help?" Sam hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to run. To disappear into the crowd like he always did. But he forced himself to stay. The guard sighed, looking around. Then, in a lower voice, he said, "Follow me." A secret meeting in the staff lounge. Sam followed the guard down a hallway labeled "Staff Only." His pulse pounded with every step. Was this a mistake? Was the guard leading him to someone who would throw him out? But then they entered a small lounge. There were vending machines, a few lockers, and an old couch. It was quiet. Safe. The guard gestured to the couch. "Sit." Sam obeyed. The man sat across from him, arms on his knees. He studied Sam for a long moment before speaking. "I've been working this job for 15 years, he said. "Seen all kinds of folks pass through here. But I've never seen a kid who doesn't have a flight, doesn't have parents, and somehow manages to stay invisible." Sam stayed silent. The guard leaned forward. "How long?" Sam hesitated. His voice was barely a whisper. "Almost a year." The guard closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he sighed deeply. "What's your name?" Sam bit his lip. "Sam." The guard nodded. "I'm Malcolm." He scratched his beard. "All right, Sam. Tell me the truth. You got no home to go to, do you?" Sam couldn't answer. Because the truth was, he didn't know. He had spent so long waiting, surviving, that he had stopped asking himself the big questions. Did he even have a home anymore? Was there family somewhere looking for him? Or was he truly, completely alone? Malcolm sighed again, then stood up. He walked over to a vending machine, pulled some coins from his pocket, and bought a granola bar and a bottle of water. He tossed them to Sam. Sam caught them on instinct, staring. "What's this for?" Malcolm leaned against the wall. "Because you're hungry." Sam hesitated, then opened the wrapper and devoured the bar in seconds. Malcolm watched him quietly. When Sam finished, he wiped his mouth and looked up. "What happens now?" Malcolm exhaled. "That depends. You got any family? Someone I can call?" Sam's chest tightened. No. It wasn't entirely true. Maybe there was someone out there. An aunt, a cousin. But if they existed, they had never come looking for him. Malcolm nodded slowly. Then he said something that made Sam's stomach drop. "You can't stay here forever." The fear of the unknown. The words hit Sam harder than he expected. For months, the airport had been his whole world. It was scary. It was lonely. But it was familiar. If he left, where would he go? "What if I just stay?" Sam asked, gripping his backpack. "I know how to survive. I don't cause trouble. Malcolm frowned. Kid, this ain't a home. Sooner or later, security's gonna catch on. And then? It won't be up to me anymore. Sam looked down. He felt like the walls were closing in. He had spent so long running. So long hiding. He didn't know how to be normal anymore. But then Malcolm said something that made him pause. You deserve better than this, Sam. Sam blinked. No one had ever said that to him before. Not even his father. Malcolm stood up. Look, I know a place. A shelter. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Sam froze. A shelter. It sounded like a prison. Like a place where people decided your fate for you. He couldn't do it. He shook his head. No. I'm not going. Malcolm sighed. You afraid they'll hurt you? Sam didn't answer. Malcolm studied him for a moment, then sat back down. All right, he said. Then what's your plan? Sam didn't have one. Malcolm chuckled. That's what I thought. Then, after a pause, he said, tell you what. You don't have to decide today. But you and me? We're gonna talk again. Tomorrow. Same time. Sam hesitated. But then, slowly, he nodded. For now, it was enough. A glimmer of hope. That night, Sam sat in his usual corner near the empty terminal, staring at the planes taking off. For the first time in a long time, he let himself imagine a different future. A future where he wasn't just surviving. A future where he wasn't alone. But could he really leave? Could he really start over? As he watched a plane disappear into the clouds, a single thought echoed in his mind. Maybe it was time to stop waiting. Maybe it was time to take a chance. The bridge between two worlds. For the first time in 6 years, Sam had a choice. He could continue living in the shadows of the airport, blending into the crowds, scraping by, never truly belonging. Or he could step into the unknown. Malcolm, the security guard who had taken notice of him, had given him an option, a shelter. A place where, for the first time in years, he could have a bed, a warm meal, and maybe even a future. But that also meant giving up everything he knew. It meant accepting that his father was never coming back. It meant leaving the only home he had, even if that home was just a place full of strangers rushing past. And Sam wasn't sure if he could do it. The terminal's last night. Sam spent that night sitting in his usual corner near gate 14. This had been his home for so long. He had seen thousands of flights take off, each one carrying people toward lives full of adventure. He had imagined himself on those flights countless times. But instead, he had stayed. He leaned against the cold wall, knees drawn up to his chest. The hum of the terminal was comforting in its own way. The announcement system crackled, calling out flights he'd never take. His mind raced. What if Malcolm was lying? What if the shelter was worse than the airport? What if they locked him up? The thought made his stomach turn. He had survived on his own for 6 years. He had learned to be invisible, to take care of himself. Did he really need help? But then, another thought crept in. What if Malcolm was right? What if he did deserve better? Sam hugged his backpack tightly. For so long, he had told himself that waiting was the right choice. That if he just stayed in the same place long enough, his father would come back. But 6 years had passed. And Sam was still alone. A decision at dawn. When the sun started to rise, Sam made up his mind. His heart pounded as he stepped toward the security checkpoint. Travelers pushed past him, rolling their suitcases, checking their phones, too caught up in their own lives to notice a skinny kid with a too small backpack hesitating near the barriers. Then, he spotted Malcolm. The security guard stood in his usual spot, arms crossed, scanning the crowd. But when his eyes landed on Sam, his expression softened. "You came," Malcolm said. Sam nodded. "Yeah." Malcolm studied him for a moment, then gestured toward the staff exit. "Let's go." Sam's feet felt like lead as he followed Malcolm out of the airport. For the first time in 6 years, he was leaving the city beyond the airport. The outside world was louder than he expected. The airport had always been busy, but it had rules, order. The outside world was chaos. Cars honked. People shouted. The air smelled different, like car exhaust, food carts, and something else he couldn't quite place. Sam stuck close to Malcolm, feeling small in the rush of the city. "Stay close," Malcolm said. "It's not far." They walked down the sidewalk, past towering glass buildings and crowded bus stops. Sam's eyes darted from street signs to shop windows, trying to take everything in. He had spent 6 years watching the world from behind airport glass. Now, he was in it. A shelter with a story. When they arrived, Sam's first instinct was to run. The shelter was a tall, brick building with a metal sign that read Bridgeview Youth Center. It looked cold. Not like a home. Malcolm must have sensed his hesitation because he gave Sam a reassuring nod. "It's not as bad as it looks, kid." Sam's hands tightened around his backpack straps. Then Malcolm knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened, and a woman in a gray sweater peered out. She had warm brown skin, glasses perched on her nose, and tired but kind eyes. "Malcolm," she said, smiling. Then she noticed Sam and her expression softened. "This is him?" Malcolm nodded. "Sam, this is Miss Irene. She runs the place." Miss Irene crouched to his level. "Nice to meet you, Sam. You hungry?" Sam hesitated. "Yeah," he admitted. She smiled. "Come inside. We've got breakfast on the table." Sam took a shaky breath. Then, he stepped inside. The weight of the past. The shelter was nothing like the airport. It was quieter, warmer. The walls were lined with old posters, and the smell of scrambled eggs and toast filled the air. A few kids sat at a long table, eating and talking. Some of them looked younger than him. Others were older. None of them looked afraid. Miss Irene led him to the kitchen and handed him a plate of food. Sam stared at it. For years, he had survived on scraps. Leftover sandwiches, half-eaten pretzels, whatever he could find. Now, there was a full plate in front of him. It felt strange. Like he was doing something wrong. Miss Irene must have noticed, because she spoke gently. "You don't have to rush. No one's taking it from you." Sam nodded and took a small bite. It was warm. Real. His chest ached in a way he didn't understand. The first night in a real bed. After breakfast, Miss Irene showed him to his room. It wasn't big, just a small space with a bed, a dresser, and a window. But it was his. Sam sat on the bed, running his fingers over the blanket. For years, he had slept on benches, in corners, in places where he had to keep one eye open. Now, there was a door. A lock. A place where no one would chase him away. The thought was overwhelming. He wasn't sure if he would ever get used to it. As he lay down that night, staring at the ceiling, his mind raced. Could this really be home? Or was this just another place he would end up leaving? A bridge between two lives. For 6 years, Sam had been a ghost. A kid with no home, no past, no future. Now, he was something else. Not quite safe, not quite belonging. But for the first time in a long time, he was somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, this was where his real story would begin. The beginning of something new. For the first time in 6 years, Sam woke up in a real bed. Not on an airport bench. Not curled up in some forgotten corner of the terminal. A bed. With soft sheets, a pillow, and a thin but warm blanket. For a moment, he didn't move. He stared at the ceiling, his mind disoriented, like he had woken up in a dream he wasn't sure he belonged to. Then he remembered. He had left the airport. He had stepped out of the only world he had known for years and into this place. A shelter. A room of his own. A world beyond the terminal. And suddenly, it felt terrifying. A day unlike any other. Sam sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. The air smelled different. No jet fuel. No airport food. Instead, the scent of toast and coffee drifted in from somewhere down the hall. There was a small dresser in the room, empty except for a clean t-shirt and pair of sweatpants Miss Irene had left for him. He still wore the clothes he had arrived in, the same ones he had been wearing for days. He didn't know what to do. For years, his morning routine had been the same. Wake up in the terminal. Stay out of sight. Find food. Watch flights. Wait. But today, there was nothing to wait for. What did that even mean? A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sam? Miss Irene's voice came from the other side. You awake? He hesitated, then answered, yeah. The door cracked open, and Miss Irene peeked in. She smiled warmly. Breakfast is almost over. You should come eat. Sam nodded. But when she didn't leave right away, he knew she was waiting for something else. A real response. I'll be there in a minute, he added. Miss Irene smiled. Good. Take your time, but don't take too long, okay? The pancakes won't wait forever. Then she was gone, leaving the door slightly open. Sam took a deep breath. This was real. And if he was going to stay here, he had to figure out how to live again. Meeting the others. The dining hall was bigger than he expected. It wasn't fancy, just a long room with wooden tables, big windows, and a counter where a woman in an apron stood, handing out plates of food. Several kids sat at the tables, talking and eating. Some of them looked like him, lost, cautious, unsure. Others were laughing and chatting like they had been here forever. Sam hovered at the entrance, feeling like an outsider. Then he felt a light tap on his shoulder. You knew? Sam turned to see a boy his age staring at him. He had short, messy hair, and his shirt had a rip near the collar, like it had been stretched too many times. Yeah, Sam said. The boy nodded. Cool. I'm Tyler. Sam hesitated before answering. Sam. Tyler pointed to the food counter. Come on. If you don't get breakfast now, you'll be starving by lunch. Sam followed, grabbing a plate of pancakes and sitting with Tyler and a few other kids. For the first few minutes, he barely spoke. He wasn't used to eating in front of people. Wasn't used to being noticed. But something about Tyler made him feel less alone. So, where'd you come from? Tyler asked between bites. Sam tensed. Did he tell the truth? That he had spent the last 6 years in an airport? That he had been waiting for someone who never came back? He didn't want to see the looks of pity. So he just shrugged. Nowhere important. Tyler didn't push. Instead, he grinned. Well, welcome to Bridgeview. It's not the worst place to end up. Sam wasn't sure if he agreed. But for the first time, he considered the possibility that maybe he wasn't alone in this. Learning to be normal again. Days turned into weeks. At first, everything felt foreign. The idea of having a routine. A bed. Food every day. It was like his body didn't trust it. For years, he had trained himself to survive. To expect hunger. To sleep lightly, always ready to run. Now, people expected him to relax. To sleep through the night without fear. It wasn't easy. He had nightmares, memories of the airport, of waiting, of watching people leave while he stayed behind. Some nights, he woke up sweating, his heart racing, terrified that this was all a dream. But every morning, the shelter was still there. And slowly, he started to believe that maybe he could belong. The letter that changed everything. One afternoon, while Sam was helping Miss Irene clean the kitchen, a knock sounded at the front door. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened it. A tall man in a suit stood outside. Sam's stomach twisted. He recognized that kind of suit. Social worker. The people who decided where kids like him ended up. He wanted to run. But before he could, Miss Irene called him over. "Sam," she said softly. "This man is Mr. Carter. He's here because he has some information about your father." Sam froze. The words didn't make sense. "My, what?" Mr. Carter cleared his throat. "We've been looking into your case, Sam. We found something." Sam's hands clenched into fists. He didn't want to hear it. But at the same time, he couldn't not listen. Mr. Carter handed him an envelope. Sam stared at it, his heart pounding. His fingers shook as he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. He started reading. And suddenly, the world stopped. A truth he never expected. His father was dead. Had been dead for years. A car accident. The same week he had disappeared from the airport. The same week Sam had sat in the terminal, waiting. He had never abandoned Sam. He had never meant to leave him. He had just never made it back. Sam felt like he couldn't breathe. He had wasted 6 years waiting for someone who was never coming back. Tears burned in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Miss Irene placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Sam." Sam didn't respond. He just folded the letter back up and clutched it so tightly his knuckles turned white. For the first time since he was 7 years old, the truth settled deep in his chest. The waiting was over. His father wasn't coming. He never had been. And now, Sam had to decide what came next. The road ahead. That night, Sam sat by his window, staring out at the dark city. For years, he had imagined what it would feel like when he finally got answers. He thought it would bring him peace. But instead, it just felt like loss. Like his whole life had been built on a hope that had never been real. But maybe that meant it was time to stop waiting. For so long, he had been stuck in the past. But now, for the first time, the future felt wide open. And for the first time in 6 years, Sam let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could start over. He wasn't the lonely boy at the airport anymore. He was something new. And he was ready to find out who that person was.